Welcome to Finding Datasets with GenAI. Today we're going to go over how to find datasets using GenAI tools. We will define some terms, go over some recommended tools. I will live demo the search process, and then we'll have an activity. So some important definitions are one, generative AI, which is an AI that can create original content in response to a user's prompt or request. A large language model, in other words, ChatGPT is an example of a LLM. They're AI systems that are capable of understanding and generating human language by processing large amounts of text data. We also have the term operationalization, which is the transformation of an abstract theoretical concept into something concrete, observable, and measurable in empirical research projects. Prompt engineering refers to the process of writing, refining, and optimizing inputs to encourage GenAI to create specific high-quality outputs. In other words, how we communicate with AI. Proxy variable goes hand in hand with operationalization. It's a variable that's used instead of the main variable of interest when that initial variable can't be measured directly. And these will all make sense as we move forward. So the tools that I wanted to recommend are ChatGPT, Dataset Finder, Gemini, and Perplexity. So I would recommend using ChatGPT, Perplexity, or Gemini to find the proxy variables. This is only referring to instances where your initial variable isn't directly measurable. And then once you get that help to break down your topic or to find in other words, to find related variables that are measurable, you can then use the ChatGPT Dataset Finder to actually find the datasets. Just some interesting highlights about the different tools. When you ask ChatGPT for proxy variables, it will offer advice on choosing them. Google Gemini does something a little different. It goes into the differences between objective and subjective variables, and Perplexity will list the sources, the actual sources, and it'll provide some important considerations, like useful information that's related to the use of proxy variables. When you find ChatGPT Dataset Finder to find datasets, you'll find that it lists datasets and corresponding files. It lists the datasets and the files clearly, and then it'll also offer to provide direct download links for the datasets. So the search process, as I mentioned, was one, operationalizing your topic and then finding the datasets using prompt engineering. So what you're going to want to do is ask the GenAI for help finding proxy variables measuring whatever your initial topic is, or you can ask what are some measures for. So, for example, maybe you were trying to measure job satisfaction or quality of life. So there may not be data sets that measure this term or this concept. So then in that case, you would ask for the proxy variables, something like more concrete that may be asked more likely to be asked in surveys. So those might be turnover, and this is through asking the tools. These are what the tools responded with, like turnover rates, absenteeism, stress, burnout, these might be more just accessible, these measures, rather than the term job satisfaction, which can be kind of like subjective. So some additional examples of proxy variables for quality of life and proxy variables for advertising effectiveness are shared here. But to go back to the search process, the first thing we'd want to do is, so we'd go choose a tool, like you can ask ChatGPT, what are some measures for job satisfaction? And in this way, it'll give you some specific examples, pay, satisfaction, supervision, coworker, etc. These are all proxy variables that you can ask for. And it also gives specific scales that have been used, that have been published scales for those actual variables. Once you have those proxy variables, then you can take those and then plug them into the dataset finder, which is part of ChatGPT. So you can say, you can move over to the dataset finder and ask, help me find data sets on some of the examples it gave were pay satisfaction. That was one of the examples. And then because I was very simple in my prompt, it's asking me to be more specific, and we will talk about being more specific in the next slides, but just showing you the process. I'm just giving you the overview at right now of the correct steps that you should be taking in the process. But you could just continue this way where you answer specifically what it asks you. That is one way of doing it. You can just simply answer the questions that it asks you, but the other portion of the presentation was to describe prompt engineering, which is how you communicate with Gen AI. In other words, how you communicate with Gen AI, like how you prompt it to answer your questions. So you're basically going to give it instructions, but when you do, you should be specific. You should be asking for a specific format, a time frame. Format meaning like an Excel or a CSV file. You should be specific about the data you're looking for. You should specify raw data or data set, or else it will just give you probably aggregated data. And you also want to provide your context, like who you are, what your goals are, what your role is, and give it some limitations if you have any. Initially, you can also give it some specific examples. If you have them, you can tell it to only use reliable sources and ask it to cite sources so you can check them for credibility. You can actually keep asking for more context, details, or examples as you proceed, and remind it of previous prompts if it forgets. So an example of a really specific prompt would be something like this, where you describe who you are, what you're researching, what you need, what it's for, what your goal is in the project. you can ask for like a specific number of rows and a type of in a specific format, though I wouldn't really be this specific because that would kind of limit your results. Here it's giving actual names for columns, which I think that might be too specific, but it's just an example of how specific you can be. And that is it. So if you want to, going back to the actual demo, when you go to ask Dataset Finder, you can say something like, I am a doctoral student studying patient satisfaction with hospitals. Help me find data sets from the past 3 years. In CSV format. This would be more specific than help me find data sets on patient satisfaction. So you can kind of make it more specific this way, and then it will ask more questions if you have not specified, for example, the geographic location. So I would say this would be a good beginning prompt. So now you can try this exercise on your own. You could choose one of these topics and then pick an AI tool to find the variables you're looking for, and then use ChatGPT Dataset Finder to find 2 potential data sets. We'll take about 5 minutes to do this, and then we can kind of see how you did in your process, any questions you had, or anything interesting you found during the process.